I mean, what was unusual for me was obviously a lot of what I represented.
Yeah.
A lot of what Michelle and I had tried to project, the values, our thinking about America. You know, my successor seemed to represent the opposite.
Right.
Not seemed, did.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a lot of anger, a lot of sadness,
Yeah.
some fear.
So the saga continues where Democrats have absolutely no clue how to respond to the Gaza ceasefire, because after all, this is something that checkmates them rhetorically. Because on one hand, if you're a mainline Democrat who has spent the past 4 years claiming that Biden was an effective president and Trump and Republicans don't know how to govern, then it really does beg the question as to why he and his supposed 50 years of statesmanship experience could not get this done. If you're going to campaign on the adults are back in charge, how exactly is it that the supposed unstable authoritarian man-child did a way better job at something like diplomacy than you did? Or on the other hand, if you're a far-left Palestine activist like Greta Thunberg, I think these people are struggling with what are we going to grift on and virtue signal about next, right? There's a reason why a lot of them are saying, look, we can't be happy because Trump is still complicit in the genocide. Or they're saying the war is going to start back up again. And I think it really boils down to you're starting to realize maybe it was never really about Palestine. This performative activism, which, by the way, was completely shattered in the span of a few weeks by an actual man of consequence in history that did more than just virtue signal at people, perhaps was never really about Gaza or Palestine itself. After all, if you're going to be chanting in the streets, globalize the intifada, I have to imagine that doesn't just mean from the river to the sea. It doesn't just mean, against Israel or Palestine or something. And there's a reason why there's so much crossover with that protest movement and the communists and the jihadis who are allowed to come in and flood the West, largely thanks to the communists, a kind of unholy trinity of characters there. But nonetheless, you are starting to see some of those cracks show up because people like now even Joe Biden are being forced to almost hilariously credit Trump for the Gaza ceasefire deal. Although, on the other hand, they are themselves trying to take a little bit of credit for it. So we'll show you both sides, right? On one hand, Biden is saying, thank you, Trump. On the other hand, he's saying, well, Trump got it done because of me, which is obviously not true. The negotiations went absolutely nowhere under Biden. By the way, other leftist world leaders like Keir Starmer are saying similar things, but we'll get into it. We'll tell you all about the current left-wing cope session in today's video. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work and ensure that we can keep doing these videos. And that said, just as one example, here's Keith Edwards saying, Joe Biden had a peace deal in place. The COPE session is about to come. Wait for it. Joe Biden had a peace deal in place, but then Netanyahu and Trump met in Mar-a-Lago and decided that keeping the war going would benefit them both. 10 months later, they're signing the exact deal that Biden brokered. Oh, here come the excuses, right? So first of all, there is some truth in that. Biden tried to get this deal through, but it was a hard deal to sell. Right? Trump, the salesman, the businessman, got it done. But okay, fine. Let's take this conspiracy theory that Netanyahu colluded with Trump to sabotage Biden simply so that, he could win the election off of it and then give Trump the Nobel Peace Prize. What an insane thing to say. But let me further go on and state that even if that is true, it still shows what? That that's a foreign policy failure of Biden. Because you mean to tell me, this is the argument, right? When you're dealing with foreign policy, everyone is kind of cynical and self-interested. Everyone has their own motives and agendas, and you have to balance that and kind of play the both sides of that and all of that, right? That's not exclusive to Netanyahu or Trump, right? That is a major component of navigating a negotiation. Because after all, if you're trying to make a peace deal between two sides, you have to ask what both sides want. So what kind of excuse even is this, right? Again, Why was Biden, the leader of the free world, the most effective president who knew how to govern, why couldn't he overcome that factor if he was such an amazing president, right? Couldn't you also make the case, by the way, that Iran, who Trump has obviously, not done very nice things to as of late, could have also told their proxy and Hamas to try to not make peace, right? You could play this conspiratorial game all day. Ultimately, it is the job of the president of the United States to still get it done, and that is their legacy, right?
Some of the top Biden administration folks who were there, like Antony Blinken, seem to want some credit for the peace deal. Blinken says it's good that President Trump adopted and built on the plan that the Biden administration developed. What do you think about that?
Everybody knows it's a joke. Look, they did such a bad job. This should have never happened. This wouldn't have even happened. That was weak leadership, terrible. And the same thing with Russia, Ukraine. If just a decent president, not a great president like me, not a great president. If a decent president was in, you wouldn't have had the Russia-Ukraine. And this is, I would say, even more so. This was bad policy by Biden and by Obama. Remember when Bibi came and he begged that you not do what they were doing with Iran? You remember that, right? Begged them. And they wouldn't even listen to him. Everything they did was the opposite what you should have done. And it's nice that they try and take a little credit. That was years ago, and the mistakes were made years ago, and it was both by Biden and Obama.
And so what did you do so differently? Because I know a lot of it was behind the scenes. So what did you do so much differently than Joe Biden to end the war? I
resonated with the Arab leaders, the Muslim leaders, and the Jewish leaders. For whatever reason, you tell me why. You know, he said that in my first news conference, I answered more questions of him than Biden did in 4 years. And I think that's pretty close to being true.
Now, there were no Pinocchios in the fact check.
None. That's right. That's right.
That said, here was the official response of former, thank God, former President Joe Biden on the very situation. So let's read it in full, right? Quote, "I am deeply grateful and relieved that this day has come. For the last living 20 hostages who have been through unimaginable hell and are finally reunited with their families and loved ones in Gaza, and for the civilians who have experienced immeasurable loss and will finally get the chance to rebuild their lives." Aww, nobody disagrees with that. But anyways, here's where it gets interesting. The road to this deal was not easy. Oh, really? My administration worked relentlessly to bring hostages home, get relief to Palestinian civilians, and end the war. I commend President Trump and his team for their work to get a renewed ceasefire deal over the finish line. Then he goes on to basically state, now with the backing of the U.S. and the world, we're on a path to peace, blah, blah, blah. So, very interestingly, right? He touts the fact his administration worked relentlessly to do all these things, which is, of course, true. That's not a secret. The Palestine activists who were so angry at him in the 2024 election, obviously that was a major concern. So it's no secret the Biden administration was trying. I don't fault them for lack of trying, but they didn't get it done, right? So what do you mean you worked relentlessly? And by the way, he commends President Trump getting it over the finish line, essentially saying we started it, but Biden finished. Biden started it, but Trump finished it. But notice the words there: renewed ceasefire deal. So what you mean to say is that your ceasefire deal or attempt at that was rejected time and time again, and Trump practiced actual effective diplomacy and got it done, right? It was really not that complicated. It's actually extremely simple. And we could debate some of the reasons for that. One could argue that the Iran nuclear strikes, which were highly controversial, even among the right wing. I had my skepticism of it at the time, but at the same time, I could see the vision here, right? Ultimately, first of all, kind of proved Iran, and by proxy, its own proxy, Hamas, to be a little bit ineffectual. It sort of flexed U.S. muscle on the world, but it also basically said to Israel, okay, we gave you something that you want, therefore, can you now give us something we want, which is the peace deal? See, and that's why it's really interesting that So many people on both sides of this, whether it's the neocons or the hardcore anti-Israel, even like right-wing, try to put Trump in these like one of two camps, right? Neocons are saying he's too soft on foreign policy. He needs to stop trying to make peace with terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, the anti-Israel crowd, hardcore, those people, the fanatics, right, say that Trump is bought by Israel. He's being controlled by them. And in reality, the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? If he had listened to either of those parties, the hardcore neocons or the crazy fanatics, he wouldn't have gotten this done. He got it done because he effectively threaded the needle, right? He gave Netanyahu something he wanted with the Iran strikes. At the same time, there's well documented that they've had clashes back and forth, right? They've not gotten along on certain other issues, but that's kind of how negotiating works, right? You have to sort of give both parties something they want, but also be clear to them, you're not going to get everything you want. You have to stay in line. And that is why, again, Trump foreign policy is successful. It worked, I'd argue, pretty well in the first term. And here you see it working once again. Of course, Joe Biden, who was unwilling to really take any of these chances, never got it done, I would argue, for those exact same reasons. So just something I would like to point out. Of course, you are further seeing, if there's any skepticism, ladies and gentlemen, that the Egyptian president, an Arab Middle Eastern leader who has a lot of, I would argue, authority to speak on this, acknowledges himself in the peace summit today that no, this had nothing to do with Biden. As a matter of fact, he states that Trump is the only one who could have brought peace to the Middle East. Quote, "Your Excellency is the only one capable of bringing about an end to this war." Take a listen.
في خلال اتصالي بفخامة الرئيس ذكرت له ذلك بدر قلت لفخامة الرئيس أنت وحدك القادر على تحقيق السلام في منطقتنا.
I even said that very precisely during my communication with Your Excellency, that you are the only one who is able to bring about peace and to achieve peace in this part.
بشكرك فخامة الرئيس.
I thank you, Mr. President.
ولكن عايزين نستكمل نثبت وقت إطلاق النار وقت بصراحة.
So yeah, needless to say, do not sit here and try to take credit for this, Genocide Joe. Genocide Joe, ladies and gentlemen. That said, it does get more interesting as, for instance, as one example here, on C-SPAN earlier today, this New York Democrat voter, who I would assume is likewise struggling to really process what just happened, actually was moved to tears over Trump's peacemaking between Israel and Hamas. So take a listen as well.
Democrat, good morning. What'd you think of the speech?
Yes, hi. That was I'm going to get choked up. A momentous speech. And I'm a conservative Democrat living here in New York, where this example of bringing peace to everyone should be thought of in New York City, where out of ignorance, the people are about to elect a guy who's pro-terrorist, pro-Hamas, who's friends with his people in Uganda, a country that lawfully executes people for being gay. And this should be a wake-up call to everyone, that people can live together. I go back, I worked as a young man for Humphrey and for McGovern, and became more conservative as I've gotten older. But this was like the best. You know, he does it in his own style. We actually live pretty close to where he grew up. And, you know, New Yorkers like Bernie Sanders are sort of different. They're funny. They're abrasive sometimes. But there should be a lesson to all of us that we can all live together. I think the future, if the Gazans really accept the goodness and the money that's going to come from the Arab community and from the world community, it can be a different world. And I'm sorry for being so emotional, but it's a great moment in history for everyone. And we have to reject hate. We have to reject Antifa. We have to reject Mandami. And we have to come together as human beings. I'm an old guy. Life is short. And we should live it with love. All right, thank you.
Well, hey, I mean, he's not wrong. And again, I think what you witnessed is President Trump, a man of true historical consequence, right? The man in the arena, if you will, referencing that famous Teddy Roosevelt quote about the critics versus the person who's actually in there doing something, actually affected real change in history. Whereas the Palestine activists who were screaming, again, not only did they affect this issue in absolutely no way, okay, just pure performance, but I would further say, imagine someone like Zoran Mondani actually was the president. Do you think they would have successfully brought about an end to this war, right? Because they still say Trump is, paid by Israel, Zionist shill, all these things. But let's be realistic about it. No, they wouldn't have the first clue, even how to approach it, right? They can virtue signal to the American public because that does appear what they are good at, right? Talking about things, but what would they actually do? Do you think Mondani could sit in a room between the leaders of Hamas and the leaders of Israel and actually get anything done? Okay? Or do you think he would either just scream platitudes or even behind closed doors, not have the first clue of what to actually do? Okay? And I mean, frankly, you could argue Joe Biden clearly didn't either. He had a plan, but he didn't know how to talk to people, right? So that's why Trump deserves the utmost credit here. Because you're basically negotiating between an immovable object and an unstoppable force, okay? And you threaded the needle in between that to somehow get it done. And that's, of course, massively significant and a historical achievement. Now, that said, Joe Biden is not the only liberal world leader who's trying to take credit for the situation. We got to talk as well about Keir Starmer, okay? The leftist Labour Party Prime Minister of the UK. Someone we've made fun of a couple of times on this channel because, I mean, just look at this guy. Like, he has no clue what he's doing. He's completely unfit for this position. Every time I look at him, I am just utterly shocked in the sense that, how is this guy the prime minister? Every time I look, I ask myself that, He's the prime minister of the United Kingdom, right? Arguably America's most important ally historically. Just decades ago, ran the biggest known empire in the history of humanity. And then here we are with Keir Starmer in charge, This guy doesn't seem fit to work in a broom closet, It might not surprise me if he's the mayor of some small town in Sweden or Norway, but again, prime minister. But anyways, take a listen as this guy tries to take credit, saying, quote, "The UK worked hard behind the scenes to get this deal done today." Oh, really? Did you? Did you, Keir Starmer? Okay, well, take a listen and see if you find that at all convincing.
Official Dr. Bassam name said Blair's not welcome in any post-war role. He said Palestinians, Arabs and Muslims have bad memories of Tony Blair. Remember his role in causing millions of deaths, his words, in Iran, Afghanistan. You didn't put forward Tony Blair for the Peace Board. What's your view?
Well, I think the makeup of the Peace Board is still being discussed. From my part, I have to say, I'm much more interested in the practical steps. I've heard you say that, but what's your view of Tony Blair sitting on the board? Well, look, I mean, that's for others to decide. Tony Blair was a great leader of our country and would make a huge contribution. But I'm not focused on which particular people should sit on which particular board. I'm focused on what do we need to do tomorrow, and I mean tomorrow, to make sure this is implemented. Would you put yourself forward or put someone else forward for the board? Well, there's discussions going on about who should be on the board, but I can be clear with you, I haven't put myself forward for that role. Okay. But what I have put myself forward for, what I've put our country forward for, is to ensure that we keep doing what we're best at, which is working as we have done behind the scenes to help get this deal to where it is today.
This guy always just looks so clueless up there. He worked behind the scenes, he claims. Oh, really? Did you? We totally believe that. That's like saying that you work in consulting or your job is sitting on an advisory board, right? These are all coded ways to explain why you contributed absolutely nothing to the greater work effort. Okay, you're more useless than human resources or a DEI office or something like that. No, as a matter of fact, the only significant thing that the UK and Canada, by the way, did over the course of this war is they very recently came out publicly and announced they would formally recognize as a government the Palestinian state, which Trump was massively critical of because he said, hey, America's trying to actually negotiate a peace deal. You guys are quote unquote allies. What are you doing? Like, this is not part of the strategy. Like, you're just causing more problems. And I pointed out, I thought the move was highly performative and useless and meaningless because it's like, wouldn't it practically make sense to, if you want to recognize a Palestinian state, do that after the war is over? Because if you recognize it now, what is the Palestinian state, especially as of a couple weeks ago, right? Like, who's the form? What are its borders, first of all? Because like 80% of Gaza was occupied by Israel. So is that the Palestinian state or not? Who is the legitimate government of Palestine that you recognize? Is it the Palestinian Authority? Is it Hamas? Or is it the IDF, considering they occupy a huge part of the Palestinian state? Like, the move made absolutely no sense. It was really dumb. It, again, was performative. This is all that they've contributed. And here he is saying, we worked hard behind the scenes. No, you didn't. By the way, pretty hilariously, who could have seen this coming, right? Right after the recognition of Palestinian statehood just a couple of weeks ago, the leaders of the Palestinian Authority demanded £2 trillion in reparations from the UK, claiming that Britain owes compensation, quotes, in accordance with international law for the land it controlled from 1917 to 1948. 2 trillion reparation, guys. By the way, who could have seen that coming? I mean, sure, we definitely, no way we could have predicted that, right? But this is, of course, the nature of Keir Starmer doing a bunch of performative empty garbage while crisis unfolds all around him, whether that's a foreign war or the fact that his own country is basically right now on the verge of a cataclysmic social event. No matter how many patriots, for instance, the British government tries to arrest for speech crimes, the protests simply multiply themselves out in the streets, and he's sitting at like a 13% approval rating, not going to be prime minister for much longer. But trust me, he totally affected this deal, guys, okay? Another hilarious moment here, by the way, as Trump and Mark Carney, who are hilariously getting along pretty well, it seems, as of late, the Canadian Liberal voters who voted for someone to stand up to Trump are not so happy. But that's not even the point. I want you to take a look at Keir Starmer right here. And this basically sums up, actually, his entire leadership. Okay, check this out. Check this out.
So you going back? No, I'll go back. I'm glad you upgraded me to president. Did I say? Great stuff. It's good. I started. We said great stuff.
Okay, did you notice what I noticed? So you see here, right? The bros are having a conversation. The cool kids are joking around at the table. And then Keir Starmer comes in. Everyone knew a kid in school like this, by the way, or maybe you were that kid, unfortunately. Okay, hopefully you've grown past this type of behavior. But obviously, conversation. Keir Starmer comes in like, hey guys, what are we talking about? What's joking about, guys? What's so funny? Can I be included? He's trying so hard to be included in the conversation. That's so funny. This is like Keir Starmer in a nutshell, okay? Always looks like an idiot up there. Always looks confused, completely lost. But, trust me, guys. He's the real one who deserves the credit for the Gaza peace accords. Okay, sure. Sure, buddy. Now, that said, the situation here on a bigger picture is just getting simply worse, ladies and gentlemen, for the liberals and leftists and, I guess, Democrats worldwide, okay? Even the spiritual Democrats in other countries. Because right off of the heels of the Gaza ceasefire, it is just announced here that President Trump does indeed plan to host Ukrainian President Zelensky at the White House on Friday. Now, very interestingly, the negotiations for Russia-Ukraine have not gone so well as people know. It's been a lot more complicated. By the way, I'm sure Biden's going to take credit for when the war does finally end, which I still do believe will happen at some point under the Trump presidency, but it might take some time considering, both sides are kind of dug in right now. But by the way, this is another example of actually Biden's failure, right? Because you can sit here and mock, Trump can't get the war done or get the negotiations through. But it's worth noting, no, the reason that's happening, and it's well documented, by the way, there were appeals for peace made early on into the war, but Biden and then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson utterly rejected them. They told Zelensky to keep on fighting. And as a result, both sides got entrenched in, right? Russia's currently in the position where they have no reason to really want to stop fighting because the attrition is kind of favoring them against Ukraine. Maybe Ukraine itself has sort of gotten used to what's going on. I don't know. Zelensky as of late sounds more like he is open to actually settling this conflict. But it is to say, right, this is another mess that, first of all, Biden allowed to happen. It happened under his watch and his failure of leadership. But secondly, he screwed up the diplomacy and the relations, much like Israel, and now is going to attack Trump whenever Trump doesn't succeed. But when Trump finally does succeed, oh, it happened because of me. Utterly ridiculous, okay? And then I'm sure, right, Keir Starmer's going to say the same. He's going to say, the war in Ukraine stopped because of me, guys. Yeah, sure. But anyways, with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.